Welcome to the Modern Day Naturopath podcast with Dr. Sue. Real talk for those craving deep healing whilst living in a modern day society. You'll be equipped with knowledge to make profound mind-body shifts that utilize ancient wisdom and will facilitate your healing once and for all. Inspired by Dr. Sue's chronic illness journey and all the real and raw pearls she has learned along the way. Come as you are. It's never too late to start.
Hi. Hi, Veronica. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Sue, and today we're going to be speaking about bioresonance testing and frequency medicine. And I'm so super excited because I have a very lovely guest who's very special to me, a great friend of mine, and an expert in all things frequency medicine, Veronica Leslie. She is a UK trained naturopath, and she is a former agricultural scientist. We actually met on Instagram, if you remember, Veronica.
Yes.
I think it was over 5 years ago. We were nerding out on DM over homeopathy. And then I fell in love with her brain and her heart, and I moved to LA, and she was just as lovely as she was over Instagram. So welcome. I'm so happy you're here today with me.
I'm happy to be here.
And before you forget, I want you to go and follow Veronica on Instagram. Her handle is healthdoll.co. So it's health, HEALTH doll.co. I love that. I always say she's my real life doll scientist. So I want to talk about bioresonance today because of its profound effect that it's had on my personal journey, finding out what was wrong with me after all of these years. And if you heard podcast episode 1, I had shared about my own journey with Lyme disease. And before we get into all of that, I wanted to ask Veronica why she started to get into the field of energy medicine, frequency medicine, and what really called you to become a naturopath. That's my first most important question for you.
Sure. Yeah. So originally, as you said, I was kind of in the hard scientist, STEM path. And if I never had some of the health struggles that I did, I'd probably still be there. Originally, I just thought, you have a problem, you go to the doctor and they'll fix it. They'll just, have the answer for you. And I absolutely still believe to this day, Western medicine can do, a lot of good. But in those instances for me, it was not able to help me. Originally, it was just, acne and then diabetes and some of that. And so when they weren't able to help me for these issues, I, said, okay, well, either I accept this or I can try to see if I can find an answer myself. So I handled it with the scientific method, really kind of observing what would, cause my symptoms, doing research. And that's where I really found out that there's a whole other level of research out there beyond just kind of, the status quo. And it opened me up to a new world. And I personally found my answers through a more holistic naturopathic approach, changing my diet, strategic supplements, etc. And from there, I was really kind of inspired to change my lifestyle. Not that I had a standard American lifestyle, maybe the way that some people do, but I, definitely, kind of changed my life. And from there, I was kind of the person people would go to ask because people saw the transition that I had made. And I said, maybe I'll just formally study this. And so I did. So I enrolled in College of Naturopathic Medicine, and I went on to study naturopathy. But my original background in agriculture was more in geophysics. And so this is, studying light systems and the physics of nature. So whenever that I actually came across this sub niche within naturopathy, which is, the field of energy medicine or homeopathy, et cetera, it was a match made in heaven. And I started seeing how, all of these things that I had studied, they had a counterpart within the human existence. It's not like we study physics and electricity, and that's a separate thing than what goes on with the nervous system in the human body. There's a lot of underlying universal principles, and that's really the master code. And there's just, extensions of all of that. So when I saw that existed, in the field, I said, well, I've got to try this. And when I did, that's how that I was able to identify at that point in my life, it was Lyme disease, much like what you went through, and to put some information on the table that did not really cross my mind at that time, because I grew up having a bunch of different exposures to ticks. I would just take them off, especially being in California. You're told that Lyme disease doesn't exist or didn't exist out here. So I just assumed, well, that can't be it. So to see that come up, and then kind of be pointed in the direction to look at resources accordingly, and more importantly, to heal, utilizing both what the discovery of these technologies yielded for me, and consequently employing frequency, not just as a tool to kind of see what might surface to point you in the right direction, but also utilizing this to correct, those very same things that we're detecting. And then from there on, that's kind of just been the niche that I've really operated in. And I have continued to see it, help and heal thousands of lives, literally, at this point.
Yeah. And I think that's the most important part of what you said, is healing thousands of people. Because think about all the people, if we look back and we say, how many patients, clients have we spoke to that have said, my labs are showing that they're normal? And even, let's just say, if they looked at it in the lens of a naturopath, who's doing more thorough tests than conventional medicine, I may even say, hey, this doesn't look that bad, or I'm not seeing any imbalances in where I'd assume I'd see imbalances. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because there are a lot of, so one, there's, my doctor said my labs are normal. So there's one part of that where, okay, are you even testing for adequate things to know if my labs are normal? How much are you actually testing? Number one. Two, are you looking at it from the regular ranges that conventional medicine gives us, or are you looking at from that kind of naturopathic functional range? And then also, even with doing those two things, what happens if we're still not getting an idea based on what those labs are as what's going on? And so that's why it had such an, I would say, one of the most important tests in my entire history of testing my own personal labs was because when no labs were showing that I had Lyme disease, even IGeneX, right? These really specialty tests, which I love IGeneX, I think they're amazing. But with a lot of these tests, it's testing for your immune response to something. So if we're not having an immune response, we're not even on these specialty expensive tests, you may not be coming up. So that's why I wanted to talk to you about this today, because I know you are really good at frequency medicine and helping to detect what's going on in people's health. So I did want to at least share a little bit, and I want, from my story, I would love to ask you some more questions and get your perspective. So in episode 1, I did explain about the journey that I went on, being very, very sick for very long, very undiagnosed. And then I had gone back to New York and found out I had Lyme disease. I didn't really share too much about how I found out I had Lyme disease. So at the time, there was 2 practitioners who were extremely important in my journey. The one was an acupuncturist in Long Island who, she actually said, I think you have Lyme disease. Let's do a bioresonance scan. And I remember learning a little bit about this in naturopathic school because one of my mentors, Dr. Dixon Tom, he had a Zytoscan. Are you familiar with the Zytoscan? Yes. He had that, and he was teaching us some of it. We don't learn that stuff in medical school. We have to go to outside mentorships to learn that type of stuff. So she did it, and it did come up. And Veronica's going to explain what this means, but it did have resonances. Would you say it's the right word? Like frequency resonances, is that properly said, of Borrelia. So basically, I was resonating with certain Lyme organisms, and I didn't really, at that point, I wasn't 100% convinced, because no one wants to admit that they have Lyme disease, right? So at that time, I remember her saying, why don't you do the Horowitz questionnaire? It's a free questionnaire. Dr. Richard Horowitz is a renowned medical doctor upstate New York. He has many patients, and he's explained that many times the tests are negative. And even with the people who were positive, what he did was he created a questionnaire where you would answer certain
Mm-hmm.
questions with a number, and the people who were actually Lyme positive on a blood test would come up with this score should they have done this test. So I think the minimum was, don't quote me, but I think it's like 25 to 40 is where you get into that criteria of it may be Lyme, right? And then it's very likely Lyme. And then this is, extremely likely that you have Lyme. And I remember I scored an 80, which was a really high number. And that's when I went to a Lyme literate medical doctor who also did bioresonance testing. Hers was more of I think I put my hand on it. It was the scan. I think the Zyto scan was my hand. And then he did a drop of blood. And then he did bioresonance testing there. And he confirmed, yes, there's Borrelia. Oh, you have Epstein-Barr. You have these co-infections, etc. So it was at that point that I had to then trust these two practitioners, because I did not have a solid blood test to say I have Lyme disease. So at that point, it was almost are you going to listen to your intuition? Or, at that point you had to just go within and say, all right, am I going to do this? Or, maybe am I going to look elsewhere? I went with my gut. I said, let's do it. Let's treat for Lyme. And how I know this was accurate is because I was never positive on a Western blot ever. And then right after he treated me for Lyme disease, based on bioresonance testing, I had 6 bands show up as IgG. I immediately freaked out thinking, why did I just spend all this money and I still have, why have I have Lyme disease? But then I realized, of course, now my body's actually creating antibodies to this. And this is exactly the validation I needed, that bioresonance was legit and it could help a lot of people. So that's my story. I've seen so many more, and Veronica has helped me through the years. Anytime I had some funky anything, Veronica, please help me. Tell me what's going on. What do I have today? But tell us a little bit about what is bioresonance testing. Some people have heard of this before. Some people have never heard of it before. What are other names for it? And as in layman's terms as you can, what would you say is the best way to describe this type of frequency testing?
Sure. So bioresonance, or any type of frequency-oriented testing, is essentially going to use energy to screen, assessments about human health. Most other assessments are going to be chemistry-based. Those are the ones that we're familiar with in both Western and functional medicine. If you're getting blood work, if you're getting a PCR, even whenever that we're looking at advanced imaging, you are using energy to be able to make those assessments, but it's still trying to look for a mass or something physical, right? So when we're looking for something physical, if something is physically there, then, we try to find that, and then we label that as pathology. But that doesn't just, spontaneously kind of come to be. Chemistry is animated by the world of physics. You all seen the periodic table of elements, right? It's organized according to the classification of physics, right? And that physics is what allows that chemistry to kind of come into the physical world and exist. So when we're actually making these assessments with energy, this is able to show us something that has, come in to influence the body without necessarily coming to a degree that our technology and what chemistry can find at this point. I like to give the example of, a hurricane is energy, right? But that's not something we would reach out and say that is tangible or that you can quite touch, but the devastations of that are undeniable, okay? So when you look and you see, energy medicine, there's many different, and that's why it's considered kind of to be in the quantum realm as opposed to Newtonian physics, because there could be many reasons why something could be coming up. And that's why it's not allowed to be a complete diagnostic at this point, because a marker could be coming up. And in the instance of Lyme disease, for example, this can show that maybe somebody doesn't necessarily have an active infection, but they have actually, suffered exposure in the past. And that exposure was enough to actually change the immune system. Okay. It doesn't necessarily need to be an ongoing infection where that there's, again, chemistry or something molecular there that's sustaining it. But if when you were bit, and I see this all the time, you had your immune system try to, navigate this and maybe even somewhat successfully shut down that threat, but it was forever, maimed, or there's a PTSD state of the immune system, that still is going to cause a lot of these neuroinflammatory effects that then after really characterize Lyme disease, right? Because plenty of people are bit by ticks with Borrelia and co-infections every day. They don't go on to necessarily develop symptoms. So the reason why it can be advantageous to do this type of a testing if you have not yet done it is just like you said, Sue, your body, did not produce any of these antibodies and there was not a chemistry evidence. Well, the very virtue of the way that Lyme disease works, or borreliosis, is it goes in and it subverts and shuts down this response. Okay. That's what creates a lot of these, symptoms, is you're not able to even eject these, metabolites or fragments. So the PCR is going to show, which is looking for the DNA fragments of Borrelia. It's going to show negative, but that's why you're sick. It's inside of you and you're not pushing it out. You can't push it out. You're lacking the ability to do that. You're not able to produce the antibodies because the borreliosis has come in and subverted the immune system to, in fact, have its way with you. So we're able to outskirt that by looking at things from an energetic residue. We're able to go in and say, with energy, we can detect that something along this lines has been here or is here. And that puts a conversation on the table to at least start looking at labs, a little bit differently, and also with better ability to discern what labs are worth our money to spend. Because I'm sure you went through a lot of expensive functional medicine testing that didn't even give you much, value, or if it did, at that point you realize, wow, if I would have known what I know now, I would actually have gotten these tests over here. But whenever we're serving any type of energy related type of testing, this puts a lot of talking points on the table. And if you feel like that you're exhausted of, looking in every different avenue and you don't understand where else more you could look, what table left, unturned, this puts areas on the radar for you to be able to see that quite literally the world of chemistry doesn't let you see. So, people can have perfect blood work and obviously not only not feel perfect, but can be very, very ill for that reason. And if I can give you one last kind of way to think about this, is that, I don't know if anybody's ever seen the Cirque du Soleil show in Vegas, the Michael Jackson 1 show, and this is something that they've had, 10, 15 years in the making now, but they have a hologram technology where that they have a holographic construction of Michael Jackson performing on stage. Okay. It's a very high quality hologram. And it looks, if you didn't know that this is not Michael Jackson and that he's died, you would believe that this is him performing on stage, except it's not. There's nothing physical there. If I put my hand through that hologram, there is no, physical chemistry going on there. But if you play that to a stadium with a bunch of fans for all purposes and don't tell them anything, they're going to react, they're going to hoot, they're going to holler, they're going to dance, they're going to sing his music, because that is soliciting that response. Even if you've had something come along the way that energetically has come in and shifted or exchanged information with the body, this can stand to create a software-like issue that has hardware-like effects, right? And so that's where that when we've got those kind of issues, this is really able to help people, because if you have a computer that is broken and the screen is not working, then okay, we get a new screen and the computer works. But getting a new screen when the system has a software issue doesn't fix the problem, right?
Absolutely. And we're not necessarily telling you that the regular conventional tests can't be helpful, but if you are at a point where you still do not feel well, you've done conventional tests, you've even done more thorough tests by a naturopathic doctor, even specialty tests, and you're still feeling this intuition or something calling inside of you saying something still does not feel right, then there really might be something that is not right. And with the bioresonance scans, what I like the most is, and I still to this day, I have a naturopath who still does it. I still consult with Veronica about this. It helps you pinpoint, and I would love maybe to talk a little bit more about that. There may be multiple, maybe different imbalances going on, but what is the one that we need to narrow into first? And that's where I feel even as a naturopath, the art of medicine comes in. I had a patient the other day and she's like, well, there's so many things to work out. Where do we start? Right. So from the experience that I've had, usually where you want to start, you do the foundations and then you kind of, build up before you break down and you have this nice systematic approach. But with bioresonance, specifically, there was a patient the other day. I have about, I would say, 10% of patients who, even with the things that normally work, something's not shifting. And are we going to have them do more expensive specialty tests, or are we going to have them do a bioresonance scan? And the patients I referred for bioresonance, when I felt like their case was at a complex level where I felt that there was more that I was not able to see on a test, there were things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of. We would have spent a lot of money elsewhere. And maybe what is coming up as their root cause or the thing to start with would not have been the thing I started with.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share a little bit about how when you do this testing, it can narrow down what your body needs maybe first, right? Like maybe there is Lyme disease, but maybe it needs to address the mold first. Maybe it needs to address the emotional trauma first. And we'll go into the emotional part because this is my favorite part of these scans. But maybe we can start by sharing about the direction that it helps you get to when you see a scan, and then know to work with the practitioner to know what to do from there.
Sure. So there's, obviously a lot of different technologies out there that are using energy or could be kind of considered within the, frequency medicine jurisdiction. So all of them will have their variances and nuances, but most systems will have some sort of hierarchy or distribution in the way that they're pulling the markers up. So you'll get to see not just, a bunch of dots on, a map and then kind of they're all given equal importance. There is generally some skew in what's called an amplification, or essentially kind of like an intensity of the energy and or loudness. Think about literal sound. An amp will create, a louder intensity, right? But it won't change the song. It shouldn't actually make the sound different, just to make it louder. So there usually is some way to kind of detect that with whatever kind of neutral testing instrument that you are using. And from there, that's where that we have the beauty of being able to make, as you said, Dr. Sue, the inference as far as what is actually stressing the body the most, or where is it beginning? Because when we have functional medicine, you might have 5 viruses, 2 co-infections, 3 different types of species of Lyme disease. And then it's kind of like, okay, so where do I start? Literally, do I go after all of this at once? Not generally recommended. Do I just say which of these titers is the highest? And that must mean my body is the most angry or most affected there, and go with that. The thing with that is that it's myopic to only look from that lens, because a higher titer may not necessarily mean that that's, the greater infection. It could be that's where that you are actually, doing the better job potentially. And also depending how long that you've been chronically ill and the damage to the immune system, what you have to work with as far as antibodies is concerned. If the body doesn't have what it needs to supply one immune system response, it's going to say, okay, let me use my second, third best option. That can be confusing on lab work because we're associating, let's say, an IgM or IgG with certain types of, correspondence. One meaning, that there could be a more acute infection, one's more long-term, because that's what the majority of the population is going to show. But if you have spent, these resources, then other players come to the scene, and then we're going to be looking at that through the lens of the fact that that must mean what that means for the average person, when that may not be your case. So when we look at energy testing, it can show us, especially very useful alongside this functional testing, that let's say we have the highest titers to, Epstein-Barr, it may show up on a frequency test that Epstein-Barr is not the one that really is igniting the immune system to the highest degree. Let's just say that could be that we see borreliosis markers come up. Now, the fact that we're not seeing the Epstein-Barr maybe come up on the energy, testing instrument doesn't mean that isn't there. It's just meaning that, maybe the Epstein-Barr might have been a result, or the titers we see there, or the inability to control what really should be a load, a viral load, that it shouldn't be consequential to us, but the body's inability to control that isn't because of the Epstein-Barr, but because of what we're seeing with the borreliosis and how that has changed the immune system. And now because of the changed immune system, the Epstein-Barr is a problem. But if you're looking just at what the functional medicine tests are showing you, it's going to say all these are problems, and let's throw a bunch of ammunition at all of it. Whenever that, usually there's one or two punching points where that this begins. And rather than go punch every single one of these, if we punch what has shifted the body to not be able to handle this in the first place, that's not only a lot easier for the client or the patient to undergo, but it's also more impactful. So whenever you have a lot of things that you're trying to kind of create a hierarchy for or understand the context or where to start, absolutely using a frequency oriented type of testing unit can help you to see that where that you don't necessarily see that. Again, pun intended.
Exactly. And you also feel like having, in an ideal world, I mean, it doesn't always happen this way. We would have some nice thorough blood tests and we would have a bioresonance scan. I want to make sure it's clear that this is not your last resort. Look, that was my first, like I did some of those conventional testing throughout the years and nothing was coming up, right? So it may not always be a last resort. It could be people's first resort. You can absolutely have a combination. It actually helps me so much more because of what Veronica just shared, because now you said there's this hierarchy of what I need to work on first and what is a result of something else instead of me going for one thing opposed to something else. So you can use your blood tests. I mean, I love blood tests. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm always showing blood tests, but I love this too because, and the other part of this is now we mentioned Lyme and we mentioned Epstein-Barr, but there are many different things that you can check, right? That would have an effect on our health. So for example, what other things are tested from my experience? And I want you to fill in the gaps with my bioresonance scans throughout the years. There's been viral reactivations that I can either see or, past viruses or new viruses. It could be bacterial infections, parasitic infections, heavy metals. Sometimes I'll get, oh, look, there's a chemical exposure of some sort. I don't know about I know your scan has highly, the scans that you've used have been highly emotional in terms of they will call out where there are imbalances in the nervous system, what emotions need to be. But I know with one of the naturopath that I have used, her scan, her name is Dr. Lara Benguin. I think it's Beguin. She will literally have a resonance. It would say like, what is your even affirmation, right? Like what's the Bach flower, or what is the nervous system calling for? And it's really interesting in some cases where we think they're pathogens, they end up being emotional issues that need to be resolved first. So before we get into the emotional part, can you kind of go through which things you have seen on people's bioresonance scans that you feel are the most helpful that have come up that weren't necessarily Lyme, but any of those others that you have found that have come up that have really kind of changed the trajectory of somebody's life or health?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd probably say some ones that will jump out at the audience because they're so relatable include a lot of endocrine or gut type of concerns. It is, or most units are going to check, or scan your entire anatomy and physiology, again, from an energetic perspective. So when it's assessing, let's say, the cardiovascular system, it may show that there could be a good deal of stress. It does not mean that person has a physical heart failure, okay? Just like if I go out and I run a marathon, my body's going to have, some oxidation and some stress and all of that. But it's understandable because I've put it through a marathon. It doesn't mean I have, cardiovascular failure, for example. So we're able to kind of map these patterns, but a lot of times where that we have, a symptom, we kind of just take for granted that that's the system of the body that's dysfunctional. And a lot of times it's not. It can be, of course, but a lot of times that's the area that's compensating for the actual problem or the source of the problem. Where you have a symptom is really just where the pressure cooker lets the steam out. But we wouldn't have that steam without the actual pressure in that pressure cooker. So if you want the steam to stop, you want the symptom to stop, you have to find out how to turn off where that pressure is accumulating, right? Otherwise, a lot of just the symptom management is just trying to appease, that steam. So one of the things that I'll see is other areas of the body come up beyond where the client or the patient is experiencing a symptom. Let's take thyroid illness, for example, one of the most common. If you've been on thyroid medication and you're not getting better, then it's probably not your thyroid gland. Because if you have a manufacturing problem and you're not making thyroid hormone, if we give that to you, then you should kind of get better. You should see some, results. And many people do. They go on thyroid hormone. They're like, finally, my eyebrows growing back. Finally, I'm not, feeling like I'm freezing in the middle of summer. And finally, I lost some weight after feeling like that I could only eat 3 olives a day. But if you're not, then that's where that's something like, let's see if we see the liver come up on a energy testing instrument, we then know with the medical education that the liver converts 65% of your thyroid hormone. So why are you not, still having the fruits of your labor in this thyroid journey? It's not your thyroid, it's your liver who's not activating this hormone. That's what we got to fix, right? And of course, you can see if there might be issues with the gland itself. One of the things that I see a lot is that people kind of tend to focus on the gland. Sometimes it's the cartilaginous tissue around the gland. Even more likely, if you're one of the EDS, Marfan's type of connective tissue people, that are predisposed to greater inflammation there. Another thing is the cellular function. So at the end of the day, your cells are going to take these hormones in and actually allow them to work. So if your thyroid is making, and your labs are fine, right? They're fine, except you don't feel fine. If your thyroid's making the hormone, but you don't feel what you should feel to have ample function, then you have to understand that the cell is the one that makes that happen. So if there's any type of toxicity that you've been exposed to that does not let the cell function properly, you have fatty acid metabolism issues. Remember, our cell membranes are at least half fat. So if those are fats that are complements of canola oil and synthetic fats and Crisco and all of that, then you're going to have some, cell membranes that aren't very penetrable, right? This stuff, Crisco, won't break down for like hundreds, if not maybe thousands of years. So we got to help your cells at that point. I could give you whatever to help the thyroid, but the thyroid is screaming and exhausting itself because it's trying to ultimately get what it wants to deliver to the cells, and your cells aren't having it. So those are just, some things for endocrine system. The gut, for example, is another area because we kind of just take for granted that the gut is just the gut. No, you've got all the way from the alimentary canal when we swallow. Digestion is beginning in the mouth. There's the esophagus. There's people that have issues where that their food allergies begin in their throat because of the eosinophils, actually having an issue there. There's people that have issues within the stomach. If you don't have proper digestion in the stomach, don't expect the small intestine to do its job. And, all the way down to the large intestine, the colon, etc. But there's systems, overlying systems. We have neurological innervations to the gut. We've got a vascular system in the gut. We've got muscular tissue in the gut. We've got epithelial, endothelial. We've got, mucus. So we've got goblet cells. There's microbiome there. There's endocrinology there. So you could have a gut issue, but that's just the stage or the platform. What's going wrong in your gut? Is it a vascular problem? If you don't got circulation going in the bowel, if you've got a volvulus, if you've got a twist, which maybe you're just, feeling that you've got occasional gut pain or cramping, and you think it's because of your digestion. Well, if you aren't getting oxygen or blood into your nerves, then your nerves will not work, and your muscles in your gut will not move or allow the food to actually meet its proper transit times. One of my favorites is SIBO because this is usually so resistant in so many other, history of patients as they've gone through providers. And a lot of times this does come down to a neurological issue, right? They've got some sort of nervous system interruption, and this nerve no longer allows proper control of the muscular junctions. And so we're moving food or we're not moving food inappropriately. And now we're getting chemistry that combines that shouldn't combine in the way that it is combining. A lot of times those neurological issues can open what's called the ileocecal valve. And that is where what we have coming from the small intestine to go into the large intestine, it should go only one way. We don't need to go back from the large intestine into the small intestine. But if your nervous system is not working properly and that valve is opening, then the contents from the large intestine can go into the small intestine. And that's where you get all this microflora trying to live in an area that it's not designed to live. So hello bloating, hello bacterial overgrowths, even fungal overgrowths. Can't tell you how many people have had SIBO and they have had a SIBO diagnosed case, right? methane gas, hydrogen, etc. But alongside that, there's also a fungal overgrowth. So they have SIBO, but they have SIBO as well. So, they're treating the SIBO and it's not getting them anywhere. But really what's causing that alongside that is also, a fungal issue. So it's really endless. I mean, ultimately, even kids that have had growth issues, you automatically assume this is going to be a pituitary issue because that's where the growth hormone is being released, except all that's supposedly normal. Then you go and you see that their pancreas comes up. The pancreas creates somatostatin, which opposes somatotrophin, right? So now we have a problem where it's not that the kid doesn't make the growth hormone, that's normal, but as soon as the kid is making the growth hormone, this overactive pancreas with somatostatin is squashing the growth hormone. So we don't grow, right? You're not going to get anywhere if you just try to kind of look at the area, the obvious area, unless it's an obvious case. And most people that aren't going to be solved by Western medicine are not obvious cases, are they, Sue?
Yep. Nope, absolutely. And that's what I think with the people that we come across, and you would agree, you have been their last resort, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we would love if this would be first resort, but that's why we're talking about this more, right? We want this to be more of a norm, especially because we have seen so much help with it. Even just a patient just recently, she was doing amazing in every other way, but just the one thing we could not get was her sleep. Like her sleep, we could not, no matter what I was doing, it wasn't helping her sleep. And I said, okay, we need a bioresonance scan. I had her see my naturopath. She told me exactly what her body was asking for at her age. She's been postmenopausal. This is what her body was asking for. I wouldn't have known that specifically. I assumed her lack of sleep was because she had mold exposure in her house. I thought she was being kept up by that, but it was actually not that, right? Yeah, that was something we needed to work on. So it's really great to kind of fill in the gaps of what we already know. And another part is having the practitioner be able to read this, right? So when you're going to a bioresonance practitioner who's going to do these frequency scans, it needs to be someone who's experienced enough to tell you, is the frequency that's coming up something that is current? Is it something that is in the past? And then it's their interpretation of it. And you would agree, I'm sure, Veronica, that their interpretation of it, I've even freaked out. Oh my God, there's a strain of this coming up. I mean, I would call Veronica in a literal panic, like, oh my God, I thought my line, the line was gone. Why is this? But every time I would get sick with a cold or a flu, just like she said before, there was this almost PTSD response, and I may have a Borrelia strain come up, right? But is that just because it's like you said, it was almost like, well, there's this almost like PTSD of every time you get sick with this, the body thinks it's this, right? So it's very important to have a person who's going to analyze this properly, because if you were to read it yourself, you may think you have all of these things, right? And that's where I think that I wanted to really talk about that, because that a lot of panic, unnecessary panic comes in when, we find all these things, but we have to know that it doesn't always mean that those are all the things you have to work on. It doesn't always mean that those are all the current active infections, but the practitioner will be able to put those puzzle pieces together. If you also have blood work too, it might help them. So I did want to share that, because if you were to just go get a bioresonance scan and not book a proper appointment with a person, right? Because I don't know nowadays, do you even know, do they have anybody who has people, going to get bioresonance scans without analysis? I can't imagine. Do they do that? Do people actually have?
There are companies that do that. But you're absolutely right as far as, this is not to be looked at through the same linear lens as functional medicine, as Western medicine. This is not the same thing as that, and only using energy as the instrument to get, the results. It plays by its own set of rules, its own quantum rules. And so that's why, again, one marker won't have an absolutism. So in Western medicine or functional medicine, if you're getting, let's say, an allergy panel to see what kind of food allergies that you have, that's looking for a very specific Ig mediated protein allergy. Okay. And that generally is going to say you have an issue with that food. We might see an allergy that could come up by using energy medicine testing. And let's just take nuts, for example. nuts can come up and the person can say, I swear that I love nuts. I drink nut milk. Like I do well with them. I don't understand why this would come up. Like how is it that I have to stop eating these nuts? Well, maybe it's not the nuts. Maybe it's not an actual nut allergy, because that person, if they really were anaphylactic to the nuts, they probably, would have discovered that, right? But maybe they did go through mycotoxin illness, and nuts do have a lot of mold. Now, if we're moderately healthy, the body deals with it, breaks it down, not a big deal. Again, we go out in the real world, we're exposed to things. It's an immune system's job to take care of that. But if your immune system is assaulted by mycotoxins, it's going to be on the defense. So anything that it's seeing come into the body that might carry that, it's going to be a little bit more hypervigilant. It's going to open the door a bit more wary. And that's why it could show up on our scan. Now, does that mean that person should never have nuts again in their life? No, but that might allow them to make the choice to say, you know what, instead of a nut-based milk right now in my life, while that I'm trying to still get through this mycotoxin illness, I might need to try oat milk or something different. And also not just that, but what the nutrients that they carry can also impose. I've had people who are kidney failure patients, and they have nuts come up because of the high phosphorus. Okay.
Oh,
So so it's not that, nuts are bad, and even that they have high phosphorus is not bad. It's not a bad or good. It's about what is your vulnerability right now. Because, any more stress in that area just kind of takes you further from homeostasis. So that person with kidney failure, that little bit of level for them is aggravating. And you'll know, because kidney failure patients literally have to chart their phosphorus. They have to chart what they're having for the day, because it can be a life and death matter. If you're on dialysis, you have to understand and calculate these things. So, there is a different way that this needs to be looked at, and it can actually become a liability if you have somebody trying to take this and make it like a functional medicine assessment or a Western medicine assessment. And at minimum, it can make the patient feel like, I'm dying. I have all these things wrong with me, right?
I know. And yes, like I said before, people are panicking, just like she said, like the person doesn't, that kidney failure patient didn't have a nut allergy. Okay, that was just too high in phosphorus. So right? So if you're analyzing it with just, with a brain that has not been trained on how to properly analyze, it can create unnecessary worry. And even, I want to bring up, it can even show chemicals that you might have been exposed to. And we had a really interesting story. We were at a friend's house and we were just doing some scans, if you remember. And I remember that day, I mean, I've been struggling with my health every day. So I don't really know, like, oh, do I feel some way because I might got exposed to something? I just wasn't feeling particularly well when I got into the house, but I thought, oh, maybe it was a long drive. And I think when you left, or I think it came, oh no, we actually scanned her and it showed up gas, right? It actually said that it was gas in the house. And we thought, I don't remember at that time, I think we were very perplexed, like, what? Why is gas coming up? And I believe the next day, do you remember? She texted us and she said they found a gas leak in their house.
Several of them. Yeah.
Several.
Mm-hmm. And they were very, very, very bad leaks.
So could you imagine? We thought, okay, maybe we didn't know what it was. And at that point, I was already a believer. But when that happened, I was like, I am sold. And so speaking of which, what are the ways you can test? So one, it's through either like saliva, urine sample, and what's a piece of nail, or that's one way that they can.
There's all different types of testing mediums. I mean, usually the most common is people have some sort of a unit and there's some sort of interaction directly with the client or the patient. They're touching, or there's an apparatus that's attached to them. Specimens can also be a thing. Somebody's submitting any type of, fluid from the body, hair, etc. And then there's also, what's known as remote testing. And sometimes that's not necessarily something that many people will talk about or offer, because it takes some advanced understanding of physics to understand a principle known as entanglement. However, there have actually literally been studies to show that this is viable. I mean, they've taken blood out of somebody, moved a couple states over, and done things to the blood in live time, and then actually done blood draw to the individual to see that there is entanglement, that there is the changes of what they're doing to the blood that they've taken a few states over. still has the ability to have, measurable resonance between, and even though that there is not locality, right, meaning it's not right there local, there is still the ability to gather information and even apply information that will impact that person at a distance. It's not bound by locality. That is not for everybody to accept at this time, and if the people aren't comfortable with that, then that's absolutely understood. You can kind of look for some of these more local based types of testing, but there's several ways that this can be done.
Yeah, and I will attest, and I know this is the like woo, it sounds too woo woo for people, but I remember at the time, it was almost 10 years ago, I was looking for support, to continue bioresonance testing while I was in New York, and someone gave me this naturopath in South Africa, and they said that she does remote bioresonance, and at that time, I knew about bioresonance. I didn't know enough to say, could this really work or not? But I remember her sharing that she was doing it in person, like you said, with some type of, whether it a handheld device, or I had seen someone where, you just either hold something or put your palm on the machine. But she was doing it in person for several years, and then she had to move. And she asked her clients, can I try? They were actually devastated because she was the only one that was able to get them help. And they said, please, I know you have a distance version, the remote version of the scan. Can you try? And she wasn't even convinced because she was scared to do that and offer potentially bad advice. And so she basically did her own self-study for a few years where she just did free scans on them. And they all told her everything you're telling us and all the things that you're actually telling us come up. And then what she would recommend, they were getting better. And so after that, she was like, okay. And all these people in the United States, New York, started wanting to see her. And so from there, she started doing these scans. And I just have to be on the phone because, right, I guess there's just whatever, I can't explain the science behind it, but the frequency of me being on the phone. And she'll tell me like the most things I haven't even said to anybody. Or like, oh, your toe, something about your toe is bruised, and my toe would be bruised. Or, hey, I'm seeing these like PTSD looping, and this is what I'm seeing. Something's going on with your nervous system. Did something trigger you? Oh, this is the proper therapy I think you need. No, don't go to chiropractic. Go get fascia work because fascia is coming up. It has helped me so much doing distance, because then I don't have to go somewhere. It's been effective. And then I know what I need to do specifically. And I don't need to then spend all of this money on 1,000 supplements because she'll say, yeah, this is all you need. This is what your body's asking for. So some people, like Veronica said, are not able to kind of grasp the, how could this really work distance? But I will say that's where it comes into the trust of the practitioner, because I've asked my patients, I said, listen, I can't really explain this the way that Veronica could, but it works. It works. She's, this has been what my experience is. And the patients take my word for it. And then I hear that they've already made like 4 more appointments with her since, and they're like, love this type of medicine now. So I think it's also important that if you do trust your practitioner and they're telling you things that are, that may be something that you're not used to or you never heard before, that you are open-minded to them. And so the other thing I wanted to mention was the emotional part. So I would love if you can share more about what would come up to help people with, any type of emotional, whether it be anxiety, depression, trauma, and how it kind of comes up in a scan. Does it say different remedies? Because I know with anything that would come up, for example, if, let's say something that we had to deal with from an infection, it would come up with this herb. With emotions, what would come up that would help balance those things? Like, for example, what are all the modalities that would come up? And then what type of emotions, and maybe an example of someone you've seen that has helped with the emotional scanning?
Sure. Yeah. So first I want to say that you were the, in my opinion, the first original emotional health doctor.
Oh, I love that. You're so sweet.
So, now it's like we just take that for granted on, social media, that like emotions and like our physical health and all that are related, even though it kind of seems obvious. But then the degree to which the average wellness, wellness oriented or enthused individual understands that is so much more advanced now than it was at the time that like you were posting on that kind of material. So I want to give the credit where the credit's due there. As far as looking at energy medicine testing and how that this can, scan or screen, first of all, for emotions, just like that you have a vibration, that would be a vibration for, let's say, what a cancer cell operates at. And, not just a cancer cell, but what does a liver cancer, cell versus what does a sarcoma, what does, a neuroblastoma, et cetera. All of them have literally their own unique vibrational patterns. The same way that there's a unique DNA sequence for all of these, the DNA sequence is just the chemistry, right? The molecular, but there's a unique vibratory sequence for all of that. Well, when we have a feeling or an emotion, it likewise has a vibratory quality. It has an energy, right? That's why we feel it the same way you feel, again, the hurricane, although it's not like a physical thing, but it can create very physical effects, okay? So each of these various types of emotions also have a spectrum of different vibratory or wavelength cycles. So these have all been, studied and cataloged. Depending on what unit you are using, they could be taking their, frequencies from anything from the work of Dr. R frequencies, Rife frequencies. They could be taking it from the Frequency Foundation, who's done studies as well to identify, what is the frequency of a, esophageal cancer cell, for example. There's not a centralized system that has kind of classified that information, but there have been actual, studies using scientific method for that. And there has been that for emotions as well. And so various different types of emotions have different energy patterns, and those different energy patterns excite different physiological tissues in the body. Now, we're born, and many of those that are familiar with the concepts of miasms and homeopathy can probably get where I'm going to go with this. But I'll keep it simple because that can be a very complex topic, is that we're all unique individuals, right? One person may get completely inflamed by a situation that the person could get scared by it. Part of that is how we come to the table, how we come to life, the way that, when we experience things, our own energy field puts a certain style on what we're experiencing. And so some of us might be more prone to deal with something, going into a fear kind of capacity. Some might have more outbursts and anger. Some might get more frustrated. Some might be more prone to grief. Let's say 3 individuals all watch something sad on TV. They see starving children, right? One person may feel very, very sad. Like they feel very sad and heavy. Some people might get disgusted that they have to see children starve. Another person may say that they're angry. They are just angry. They're all seeing the same experience, but yet what's inside that person and that energy that encompasses them has a different way of accepting that experience, and that uniquely creates the effect that it does. So it's very dynamic, right? What we bring to the table, what we're being exposed to, how those things interact. But ultimately, this does excite, much like a tuning fork, this does excite these tissues. Now, if we're overly doing that and we have a certain type of pattern that is chronic, we're doing that at the expense of allowing energy to exist in other mediums. If we're always angry, now it's okay to be angry, just like it's okay, anger is actually a feeling associated with the wood element. And this is the spring season in Chinese medicine. So it's good to have spring, right? We would want that. But do you want spring all year round? No. Okay. We may look at that and say, well, yeah, I do, but you can't have spring without winter. Winter seeds and stores the energy. Only after we accumulate the energy can we spring up with that energy of the wood element and have spring, right? There's a time to be angry when we need to protect a baby, right? And someone's coming after us to protect that baby. Anger is what we want. We don't want that all the time. And even if we feel anger, we're not an angry person. We should not personify these emotions as a self-identity. No more than Mother Nature should say, I'm a barren, nothing because that she's in winter, right? It's about this flow of these feelings and this energy. So we're able to map, when we use these type of energy units, where that we've got congestion or tension and a lack or absence of flow. That is a dis-ease. a literal dissociation of the state of ease and flow. So that is where disease can take place. So, stress is acknowledged as the number one by proxy killer for diseases. What is stress? Is stress something physical? Can I grab it? No, it is something that we feel. Okay. So emotions have various physiological effects. They have been cataloged, they have been studied. These units, all through various different, engineering, some better than others, can help us to detect that within the human energy field. And by seeing that, we can understand how that could be playing a role into somebody's health. It does not mean to say that something is psychosomatic, because this oftentimes gets a very negative rap. It does not mean we don't believe you as the patient, that this is not real. It's very, very real. Somatic means it's in the flesh, it's happening. But the fact that we see the psycho element to that lets us know that there is that energetic component. So yes, I can give you things to help your gut if you are having a nauseous stomach. But if this is because of, worrying and worrying and worrying about being criticized, then that's a pattern that we have to look at and recognize. And that's where that's something that if we don't fix that, there's only so much stuff we can give you, for the gut from a physiological standpoint. And a lot of times, when we have words, we kind of forget why we've come up with these descriptions that we have. When people talk about, for example, I can't stomach that. Where do they feel that when they're literally saying that? When we have this disgust about being unable to accept something, we literally feel our stomach churn, right? Okay. When we're depressed, we feel heavy, like somebody has sat on the chest and just anesthetized it, right? When we're angry and they say you're seeing red. Well, if you look and you map and again, this is studies that have been done. If you map thermogenic patterns, you'll see that the person's energy literally becomes most concentrated here, the eyes and the arms, right? Why would that be? If I'm angry, if I'm going to punch or throw down, these come in handy. Okay. So I'd want the energy to come through here. And again, that's where you can get into different types of techniques or ways to, go about mobilizing this energy. But I am more and more convinced in going through life as just a person and an individual, a practitioner, a professional, a scientist, that the more that you have understanding of your emotional self, the more that you have control of that, not meaning we repress the emotions. Control is actually the opposite of that. It's understanding the harmonization and be able to transmute that. Okay. The more that we have that, the more that we actually have control of the physiological health. The hardware is only going to serve us as well as the software does. And so I have absolutely seen cases where that has been a smoking gun. I had somebody that they were having dysphagia for 20 years. They could not swallow. They had a fear of choking. They didn't even want to eat with people without really having to know that there was somebody in the house in case they would choke so that they could call 911 for them. Their throat would quite literally lock. Okay. On, their emotional scans, there was a lot of patterns where that there had been a lot of abuse. There's a lot of self-image issues, et cetera. And finally, it came out that this individual was taking care of their father in their early 20s. They were going to college, had been a newlywed, but had their father with cancer move in with them, stopped going to college because they wanted to be there for their father in the last, moments of his life. But he was a very hardened and bitter individual. And he would very cruelly insult her regarding her body, her eating habits, etc. Mind you, she's giving up all the sacrifice, also trying to be patient, knowing he's a dying man. But the abuse is the abuse. We can try to make sense of that logically, but the heart and the body still feels this as what it is, as the truth. And so, long story short, some of the words that had been told to her were to shut up and to go choke. Go choke again on another sandwich. Would make fun of her, refer to her as Mama Cass, because the rumor is Mama Cass from the Mamas and the Papas died on choking on a ham sandwich. So she was told to shut up and she was told to choke. What were these clients' lifelong problems? Thyroid illness and dysphagia. Okay. All in the throat. And in looking through, a lot of the markers that would come up for her, they were all relative to being silenced, being humiliated, having no voice, feeling powerless, not being able to, biting the tongue, not being able to speak. And, for those that are familiar with the vortices that are the chakras. The throat chakra is very much about the expression of an identity, and that even ties into our life's purpose, and defining who we are. And that actually does govern the way that your throat and this whole area here will receive energy from the outside world, and how it will engage with the outside world. And chakras are not woo. There's UCLA study from 40 years ago, Dr. Valerie Hunt, who has done the substantiation of the chakras with electromyograph and various, modalities to prove and show that what the Vedics showed, thousands of years ago, is absolutely verifiable. Now, I'm not saying you have to practice as a Vedic to work with the chakras. There's many different styles. I mean, even the Native Americans, had their own chakra system. But the undeniable existence of these vortices is there. And so she was actually only given therapeutic support as it pertains to an energetic approach. And she enrolled in various different types of emotional, supportive work with different practitioners, et cetera. And she was able to normalize her thyroid values, and she was also able to stop the dysphagia after 20 years. Didn't give her things for her throat, did not give her any of the physiologically oriented type of work. This was somebody whose somatic body imprinted an information code that was forever, overriding anything else. And it wasn't until that was broken down, literally that frequency was used just like an opera singer goes to sing and shatter a wine glass, that we use the frequencies to go in and to do that, to break that wave, that instruction up, that it was set free to go be rehabilitated and used to form another, wavelength, or contribute to the field in a different way that would better serve her, I'd probably say that's one of the more powerful stories that I remember in my career. But that's hardly the beginning. I could talk about a lot of them.
And wait, let me ask you a question about what you just shared when you said with the frequency. So we didn't even get into that, and we're definitely going to have her again because we need to talk more about this. But did you have her get the frequencies? Like, is that what you meant, or just her knowing, or that was just enough, just knowing that that's what she needed to work on from a trauma perspective?
Oh no, she absolutely had frequencies. And that's, yeah,
okay.
There's a lot of modalities that you can use for emotion. A lot of times it's kind of chalked up to emotional release, but really you're not releasing this and just like poof, it disappears. What you're doing is you're breaking down this wavelength and you're rehabilitating it to be able to be used in a different capacity, right? And that's why, if you see the natural way that emotions kind of tend to work within people, they can blow up. Somebody might, get angry and they yell at somebody. Well, what is that? That's literally the body trying to mobilize and get this wavelength, this energy, this frequency out of it that it knows is so disharmonious. However, that's not the ultimate way to aspire to deal with that, because now you interjected this energy into somebody else's field, and that might be hurtful and you might be regretful of that, right? The idea is not to say that we should never be able to rightfully express ourselves or get angry. We're human. That's part of the experience, right? Just like nature, again, has her disasters, but that's part of a bigger plan. But as a pattern, we want to know that wouldn't behoove us, as well as breaking that down to utilize for another season of life, right? Or for another feeling. So she absolutely did do, frequency work, but then she was also doing things like emotion code. She was limiting the triggers. And that's really, I think, one of the biggest things people can do, is that they have to understand whose other energy in their life is convicting and fostering these type of emotional patterns. Okay. We have to accept accountability for ourselves. But if there are individuals which reinforce these patterns that are not conducive for our health, we have to remove them, generally from our life, at least until that we have some sort of means to have better bandwidth for that. And, part of that for her was, understanding that it was okay for her to feel the way that she had felt about her father, because there's guilt and confliction that she had with, well, he was a dying man with cancer. Like, I can't be mad at him, right? He's like my dad. But that's not true. The mind is going to try to tell us what we need to, try to understand our feelings, but your feelings cannot be controlled. Your feeling is your feeling. You cannot censor it. You can delude yourself into thinking that you are censoring it with your mind. But how many people come back and go, oh yeah, my like gut feeling was like so wrong. I should have just like totally have like not listened. Nah, it works the other way around. People go, I tried to tell myself that like this person wasn't so bad, etc., but it didn't feel right here, right? Think about animals. We trust our dogs to tell us, who, or our cats, like who doesn't seem to be jiving very well, right? What do they know that we don't? What's going on? Their biofields are actually a lot larger than ours because that they are so much more able to trust that innate intelligence that they have, the one that we censor with our mind, that we kind of try to say, oh no, this overrides everything, right? It's important to use our mind. That's part of the human experience. But it's important to not just use our mind. And so learning to live a heart-centered life, it doesn't mean that it's an excuse to do whatever we want emotionally and have no culpability or accountability. It's not an excuse to hurt people. It's an excuse to develop and go on this journey, one that will actually lead you to have a much more meaningful, happier, healthier life, not just for yourself, but with those that you engage in.
Oh, that's such a beautiful, honestly, that I couldn't have thought of a better way to even close this with what Veronica said. And thank you for sharing her story, because I can't tell you how many people can relate to having these, oh, well, I'm supposed to love him because this and he's sick, but he also did this to me. I've had a patient who, she even shared with me, that her father had said these hurtful things, but she really loved her father and she was guilty for getting mad at him. But there were these hurtful things that really affected her. And so the bioresonance testing was a way for your client to be able to see, okay, this is what is making me not be able to swallow my food, right? We talked about that whole throat chakra. And then not only was it then her knowing, okay, I'm going to go to emotion code, or just knowing that and feeling that and feeling those feelings. Then Veronica, we didn't get to talk about this, but we're going to have her back. We're going to finish this off about the corrective frequencies that were helpful to her. You don't always have to, right? With bioresonance, we can just do the testing. We don't always necessarily have to give corrective frequencies. There may be other things that could be done just by, like we said, utilizing what comes up on the scan and knowing what to do then, right, for the patient. But the emotional part of the scan, I think, is the most important, because, with my own journey and all of my patients, we never can get them 100% if they are denying that trauma. Some of them don't even know they have trauma, right? They don't even know, they think everything was fine. And then they're like, oh yeah, I didn't remember under the age of 10. I don't even have one memory, right? And they have all of these things that they have buried. So I think it's a great way to offer not only the frequencies by bioresonance to help correct, but also other modalities would come up, like, do they need acupuncture? Do they need to do some meridian work? Do they need to do motion code? Would EMDR be therapeutic for them? But I love that it will tell you what their body is asking for, right? Just because EMDR might be great for me doesn't mean maybe it would be amazing for Veronica. So I love that it can give us a direction. And the next time that I have Veronica back, we're going to talk about something a bit more light and fun. We're going to talk about aesthetic type medicine and how we can help with frequency to not only help with weight loss. I know that you have shown on your stories several times patients or even yourself on journeys of what you've used bioresonance for weight loss purposes. Also, people are always asking, what can I do for my skin? What can I do to help me with anti-aging? And so if you go to Veronica's page at healthdoll, HEALTHDOLL.co, she has all of her picks for the most awesome lasers. And I always trust anything that Veronica kind of stamps her approval on, because I know she has done her research. Is this a good laser? Is this amazing in terms of the results that it can provide? So I wanted to end there because we are over and I can talk about this for hours with you. But let me know, is there any summary that you want to give or any last words you want to say about what we talked about today? Thank you. This is so awesome.
I'd probably just close in saying that, a lot of care is always kind of aimed at, the human body. And that's what functional medicine does. It just does it from a more holistic, standpoint. And Western medicine looks at it from a more compartmentalized standpoint. Both have their relevancy. Okay. One is a a whole to bit engineering and one is a bit to whole engineering, right? Or, micro to the macro, macro to the micro. But if you're looking to actually target the human being, and like in my practitionership, I've always looked to the human being, not just treating a human body, but a human being. The human being is not existing outside of or separate from the human body. Then for that, you have to look at the biofield. You have to look at the energy underpinnings. That includes the emotional. It includes the psyche. It includes the literal energetic, eminence, that there's a lot of different schools of thoughts as to what we could call that or its origins or how it exists, but nobody can deny that it exists. And so unless that we're really encompassing an energy assessment in our approach to health, it's vastly incomplete because everything begins with energy. You do not get the physical human body without the chemistry. You don't get the chemistry without the physics. So I would encourage everybody to, open the paradigm of what they believe to be possible for human health. And sometimes the things that they sound really out there. Yeah, sometimes, it can take, like you said, a leap of faith to be able to put ourselves in the position to be open-minded, at the same time having discernment, right? To say, okay, I want to believe this, but also let's talk a little bit as far as how we might put this in a language of science. But I think that's where that will all be best served, is being able to be willing to do that, and medicine's already moving in that direction already. Quantum physics and quantum biology are intersecting, and what we have in the way of what we'll see in the next 15, 20, 30 years or in our lifetime, I'm excited for. I'm very excited. I've never been more excited to see some of the things that have fascinated me for 20 years become household, discussed phenomena at this point, and they're going to continue to grow that way. So I'm very looking forward to the revolution.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, for teaching me so much, for teaching your audience so much. I mean, such a great friend. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am for your wisdom with even some of my cases. Like I said, she has been there for me through thick and thin, and I'm just forever grateful. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Sue. And it'll be my privilege to be back on soon.
Oh, can't wait. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Modern Day Naturopath Podcast with Dr. Sue.